introduce Cherise Wolas. She's the author of 2 acclaimed novels so far. Her debut novel, The Resurrection of Joan Ashby, was a nominee for the 2019 International Dublin Literary Award, the 2018 Penn Debut Fiction Prize semifinalist, a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice and Paperback Row selection, an ABA Indie Next Great Read pick, and named by various outlets as the best novel, best debut novel, and top 10 novel of the year. Huffington Post called it an audacious balancing act whose betrayals come from the least expected corners, submerging reads in a dazzling universe we hate to leave. And I want to personally tell you that my book club chose this, The Resurrection of Joan Ashby, and it was definitely one of our most fascinating discussions. Her second novel, The Family Tabor, was published last July and was an ABA Indie Next Great Read. Last week, it was published in paperback and has again been selected by the ABA as an August 2019 Indie Next Great Read selection. The New York Times has also named it a paperback row selection. The Chicago Review of Books calls it a hypnotic generational saga, elegant, cerebral, and finely tuned. Nearly pitch perfect and a supple and engrossing read. Legendary Entertainment Television has optioned The Family Tabor for a multi-season premium cable television show. Her novels have been published in the UK, Poland, and Turkey, and are forthcoming in several other foreign countries, including France, Israel, and China. She teaches a master fiction class in New York City at Catapult and has reviewed books for the New York Times. Join me in welcoming Cherise Wolas.
Hi there. Okay, can everyone hear me? Thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, good. Just hold on, let me just. Okay, better? That's hard to do. Stick your face into it. Oh, okay. Okay, well, I'm so delighted to be here at Bookstock in Vermont, and actually, I'm almost prepared to move here instantly. It is just so beautiful. I'm like, are there real estate ads somewhere we can look? Are we able to afford these houses? No, right? I didn't think so. As early as 3, books and the power of their words meant everything to me. At the age of 4, fresh from the library, with a large stack piled up to my chin, I refused any parental help crossing the transom into the apartment of where we then lived. And I tripped. The books I couldn't wait to read skittering everywhere, and I yelled, "Fuck damn shit." Swear words I'd learned from my mother, swear words my father abhorred. Their shocked faces, further proof of the power of words. I started writing so young that my first stories were in crayon. I did not draw pictures. I had no time for that. I only wanted words. I was an infinitely happy child when I was reading my books and writing my stories. I wrote through elementary school, junior high, and high school. I wrote through my first 2 years of college at Berkeley. Before my junior year, I spent 6 weeks at NYU in a summer filmmaking class. And there, while learning to load a camera and block up a street and convincing my actors to get naked, while I plied them with vodka that I somehow managed to buy, though I was underage, I wrote stories. When I returned home, I pleaded with my parents to allow me to transfer. And then, for the next 2 years, I wore all black and made movies. And still I was writing, not scripts, but stories. When I graduated, my first job was as a film and development editor for a famous film producer. And still I was writing my own stories. Then, when it would have made sense to get an MFA in fiction, I went to law school and wrote stories all through law school. Entertainment law seemed like the right fit, but I found it was merely contract law sexed up with the names of movie stars, and instead I became a real lawyer. specializing in the Chapter 11 reorganizations of hot dog makers and breast implant manufacturers, big box retailers, and the like, which might not seem especially creative, but strangely was. Moving management around like characters in the story, finding the action, the plots, the subplots, the conflicts, the resolutions. I bucked against big firm life, but I adored the intellectual pursuit of the law. Nonetheless, I, a bankruptcy lawyer, had to keep a Post-it on my desk that showed me the formula for figuring out what percentage one number is of another. Yeah, it's true. Numbers were not my thing. By day, I was drafting motions of brief and in court saying, Your Honor, Cherise Wolas on behalf of, and every night, no matter how late it was when I got home, I wrote stories. And then I wrote a novel. When I had a serious draft of that novel, I gathered my gumption, turned down a partnership at my law firm, and left the practice of law. My intention? To work on that novel, to see it published, to write another novel, and on and on. But 2 weeks later, I met someone who said, You're exactly what we've been searching for. And then I was starting a film company. I was our president, legal counsel, and head of development, acquiring and developing the short stories, novels, and scripts of others. It was exhausting worrying about financing, but a lot of fun being at film festivals, excuse me, and heady when the movies we produced won awards. But I'd left law to write, and the pages of that novel were in a high stack on my desk, and I remained untouched. And then one day, standing at my living room windows, I said, why am I working on other people's words when I only want to be working on my own? And very soon after, I returned to my own writing. And when I did, something else happened. I wrote a new story that was published, and a man far away in Washington State, a musician and composer, wrote to say how much he admired it, how intensely he'd been affected by it. It would turn out to be additional proof that words matter. We've now been together for 8 years and married for 6.5. Without those words of mine in that story, the two of us, 3,000 miles apart, would never ever have met. When I wrote my first stories in crayon, I think even then I understood who I was. And had I taken the more natural path, majoring in English lit and creative writing, getting an MFA, my personal story would be far more direct. But my diverse and myriad real-world experiences, both professional and personal, have provided me with so much, including all sorts of knowledge I would hate to have missed. And the Sun has created the person I am and the writer that I hope I am. I think the finest literature creates intense intimacy with characters who may be different from ourselves, who might not share our sensibilities, priorities, thoughts, or beliefs. Shortly before her death, the writer Ursula Le Guin said, "A writer's job is to surprise readers, to shake them, to turn their expectations on their heads, because that's when they begin to see." This quote resonates deeply with me because it's what I look for as a reader, and it's what I hope I seek to accomplish with my writing. Writing for me is about exploring and engaging and discovering the unexpected. So I've learned not to come at my work with any preconceived notions about anything. And I've learned to be comfortable knowing that when I start writing, I never have any idea where I'll end up. My process begins very organically. The inspirations are often wild and untraceable. It always starts out mysteriously. A character pops into my mind, a place lays itself out, I hear a line of dialogue, an image appears. I let things percolate. I research a lot of disparate topics and that may or may not make their way into my work, but it allows my mind to start spinning in a different way and it frees my imagination. As I move deeper into a project, the characters deepen, transform, move in unexpected directions, always asking lots of questions. Of course, I'm the one who creates these characters, but they are so real to me that I perceive them as human, living, breathing beings. I feel them, hear them, see what they do, how they act, how they react, how they think, what they say, and I listen intently as they tell me who they are, the problems they're having, their issues, hopes, dreams, and secrets, what they want to do, how they want their stories to go, and the answers they're seeking. When I'm deep into a project, they chatter at me constantly, always when I'm in the tub or shower, and I've learned to keep a notebook and pen handy. And they wake me up. I spend hours sending myself emails in the middle of the night, and lots of mornings I wake finding I've sent myself as many as 70 emails between 1 and 4:30 a.m. Despite the organic way I begin writing, I am in control of everything, but I give the characters enormous freedom and space. I have found that amazing things happen that I never could have anticipated and that I would never have expected to occur if I was writing from something plotted out and predetermined. I see compelling immediacy in my work, but also a timelessness, which I hope means my novels will last into the future. And so I steer clear of setting my work in the midst of what's happening this very second, and unless germane, I avoid pop cultural references. What consumes me are the universal issues and questions that run through all our lives. The search for love, the fear we've made the wrong choice in love, the desire to understand our lives, the fear we're living an unintended life, the wish that we could undo something we've done, that our insecurities didn't control us, that our lives hadn't been upended, that we hadn't kept secrets from our loved ones, that we weren't racked by jealousy and fear, and how we form our identities. All of us have self-created narratives, and it's the exploration of those narratives and the discordant truths between them that intrigue me as a person and a writer. In both of my novels, among other things, I explore the underpinnings of relationships between husbands and wives, between parents and their children, and between siblings. The desires, frustrations, love, and conflicts that are both spoken and hidden, the nature of childhood traumas, how those hurts and fault lines manifest in adult life, how we integrate the full panoply of human emotions, the good ones naturally, but also hurt, despair, and destruction, and betrayals, both actual and perceived. And how often we try to suppress our knowledge, feelings, and emotions, which causes us to take actions we would have sworn was impossible. The personal filters into my work in two ways. One, by writing about the questions and issues that most intrigue me, and by stepping into my characters' lives, seeing their worlds through their eyes. And from the moment I begin writing, I am them. I am each of my characters, but they are never me. As I write, all kinds of clues emerge, and each clue leads to a key, and each key leads to a door, and I keep going. I never, ever reach the end of the first draft. As I write forward, I'm constantly going backwards. I'm noticing elements, themes, symbols, and patterns that are unconscious at first, and I'm teasing them out, trying to understand them and their connections. And I'm editing, revising, honing, re-envisioning, and contemplating anew. And what happens at the end is always organic. The ending finds me. And although I might fight it at first, when I find the deep currents beneath it and understand them and work with these elements, and when the ultimate elements click into place, there is a feeling of transcendence. And I think, yes, of course, it has to be this way. I love endings, both of my novels and those of others, that compel readers to keep thinking and contemplating what has happened in the lives of these characters going into the future. The Resurrection of Joan Ashby did not begin as a novel. Can I ask how many people have read it? Oh, that's wonderful, thank you. Thanks. It did not begin as a novel. For a very long time, I thought I was writing a short story about an 11-year-old boy and his mother. Daniel Manning perceives himself as the writer in his family, and he's crushed when he discovers that his mother, Joan Ashby, is a famous short story writer. Through all the versions I wrote of that story, and there were many, I was always in Daniel's skin, seeing everything from his perceptions, feeling his anger, upset, jealousy, and his desperation, wishing he could, at some point in his life, creatively outshine his mother. The story had become a very lengthy one when I learned that somebody I barely knew had published a first story collection. In 9th grade, I made a decision to banish envy from my life, and it mostly has worked, except that day, learning about this short story collection, I was crazy envious. And I furiously wrote a few paragraphs that dissipated my envy, didn't entirely let it go, but I captured that envy. And that fragment, perhaps 300 words in total, kept haunting me. And from those 300 words, I wrote a short story called Killing Close Friends. In one of those magical moments that does not accurately reflect the act of writing, I dropped an excerpt from Killing Close Friends into the short story about Daniel and his writer mother. And I suddenly realized a number of things. First, that I was writing a novel. Second, that Joan Ashby's story demanded to be told. Third, that Killing Close Friends would be a short story written by Joan Ashby and contained in one of her celebrated story collections. Fourth, that young Daniel, an avid reader and a writer of tales about a squirrel named Henry on his adventures, would learn that the truth about his mother, that she's an acclaimed and famous writer, and that truth would alter him profoundly. And fifth, that I needed to fully explore how Joan Ashby, a formidable writer, so supremely focused and determined to avoid love, marriage, and motherhood, ends up married and the mother of 2 sons. And when I understood all of that, everything changed. Joan stepped into the bright light. She was front and center. She was no longer being seen only from Daniel's perspective. And dropping in that short excerpt from Killing Close Friends was a wonderful light bulb moment in another way. I saw how the excerpt played as both point and counterpoint. And I knew that I wanted to include other excerpts of Joan Ashby's published and unpublished work. Simply asserting the fact of her talent was insufficient for me. I believed her talent had to be on display. And these stories within the story, as they're often called, are essential to the novel. They showcase Joan's talent. They reflect how Joan's fiction, how the themes contained in her fiction alter as a result of the unintended life course that her life takes. They also viscerally connect Daniel to his mother as he interprets his life through the prism of her own fiction. Joan Ashby is highly complicated and complex. At 13, she articulates a series of precepts she believes she must follow to be a serious writer. Among them, write every day, avoid crushes, do not entertain any offers of marriage, never ever have children. And by following those precepts, she experiences great success as a young writer, and then love finds her. For Joan, the intended life she's chosen for herself is far more important than love, and she refuses Dr. Martin Manning until he finally vows again and again that he also does not want to have children. And then, of course, life intervenes. Most of us can probably think of examples of things we've either done or refrained from doing in order to make somebody we love happy. I'm going to read one excerpt from Joan Ashby, and it's when Joan is faced with the momentous decision that will change her life. And can everyone hear me? Still? Okay. Okay. Was she actually considering freeing Martin from his vow? And if she did, what would she worry about? Her ability to be as present in this world as she was in those she invented, among characters more real to her than people she knew. If she went through with this, she would have to be present for the baby, could not do what her own mother and father had done to her, what Martin's father had done to him. There could be no coldness, no isolation, no distance, no disaffection, no paltry pretend love. The baby would have a right to a joyous childhood, which meant they, would have to give it that joyous childhood. She would have to willingly give all of herself, or at least most of herself. And the sacrifice new parents proclaim themselves willing to make for their offspring, could Joan do that, sacrifice herself? In her stories, her characters often suffered the sudden fall through a floor they had mistakenly believed was solid. A demarcation point between then and now, a point from which they could not retreat, when the before of their lives changed in an instant. She had never imagined it happening to her or that it would feel this way, as if there was no ground at all to stand on, nothing within sight, the sky so far away. If she were writing this as a story, if she were one of her own characters, would she write that Joan, adapting to the anguish of discovering too soon her new husband's fallibility, his ability to ignore his vow? Would she write that Joan welcoming the quickening, becoming a wondrous pregnant woman, a loving mother, basking in the adoration of that flawed husband, their home a happy place, where childhood hurts were magic wanded away? Maybe, Joan thought, maybe. Of course, the story would need some tragedy, some arc of calamity and catastrophe and misfortune and heartbreak. But this was not the time for that. She knew she could write such a story, but could she write herself into it, become that Joan? That arc of tragedy and calamity and misfortune and heartbreak in the story that Joan decides to write herself into, all of it will occur, but she'll have to read the novel to find out what it is. And so from a short story about a boy and his mother came The Resurrection of Joan Ashby, which explores one woman's personal identity and her fierce artistic identity, both of which are shattered by unwanted changes and betrayal, and the path she must travel to resurrect herself. With my second novel, The Family, the fictional Tabors, first came to me on a snowy day in a tiny town in Washington State where I was then living with the man who's now my husband. In the Tabors' first iteration, they lived in a rambling house and spoke the mostly dead language of Aramaic. In their second iteration, they were parsing through their magical qualities and becoming a contemporary family. In their third iteration, they appear in The Resurrection of Joan Ashby as the focus of one of Joan's story collections. Despite tucking the Tabors into Joan Ashby, they wouldn't let me go. And thus their fourth iteration is the novel The Family Tabor. Harry and Roma Tabor and their adult children, Phoebe, Camille, and Simon, emerged as intelligent, accomplished, and worldly. This is a family that glows, that is lucky and golden, and seems free of dark lurking truths. How real is the shine? Are they that lucky? Are they really free of dark lurking truths? 30 years ago, Harry moved his family from the East Coast to the West and made it his mission to do good in the world, and he looks upon that decision as miraculous. Roma Tabor, the matriarch, is a psychologist miracle worker and a mother whose deep love for her children doesn't prevent her from seeing them clearly. And after many decades of a loving marriage, she's certain she and Harry absolutely have no secrets from each other. And each of their children, they're all externally successful, but each is secretly struggling and keeping those struggles hidden. Phoebe can't find love, Camille doesn't understand why her life has jumped off course, and Simon feels a hole in his soul. The novel unfolds over a lovely August weekend when all the Tabors are gathering at the family home to celebrate Harry being honored for his good works, resettling refugees from around the world to what he considers his desert. As I wrote, many unexpected themes bubbled to the surface, among them truth, luck, faith, memory, identity, and the Gordian knots that tie a family together. And I'll touch just on two. The first is that of luck. In the novel, every Tabor has their own version, or lack thereof, about luck. They either believe in it, don't believe in it, believe they once had it and it's now been lost, and of course that version of themselves as either being lucky or not alters how they see themselves. This excerpt is from the beginning of the novel, and it's about how Harry the patriarch, from a bird's eye view, views himself. It is late in the second decade of the 21st century in Palm Springs, California, and on this scorching mid-August Friday night, Harry Tabor is reveling in the truth of what's coming. Man of the Decade is the desert city's exceptional honor, lofting high the special few who devotedly enrich the lives of others in astounding and uncommon ways, as Harry has been doing for 30 years, manifesting futures of promise and hope for the persecuted, the lost, and the luckless. In March, when he received the lavish announcement inviting him to ascend into the very select group, he was hesitant about accepting, and he thought, why me? But now, as he embraces Roma, the love of his life, and his wife of 44 years, he thinks, why not me? He commands immense respect and admiration as the head of his humanitarian enterprises. a man who effects miracles, trusting in the honey of bees, not the sting, to make those miracles happen. He shepherds all those he resettles here, thousands now, and looks after them lovingly with care and pride. And indeed, this moment, sheet thrown off, bodies damp, souls replenished by their Friday night union, Harry realizes there will never be a better time for this felicitous event, this proffering of esteem, this celebration of him, to which apparently 800 have confirmed their attendance. How wonderful that it has come now, when he has not yet lost his hair or his teeth or his height or his hearing or his eyesight, and any notion of him shuffling off this mortal coil is far, far in the future. So far in the future, it bears absolutely no current consideration. In fact, he will not this night consider such an eventuality at all. In the living room, a substantial pour of brandy, then he is through the sliding glass doors, stepping into the late summer night with its textured, enveloping heat, the hot air scented with life. This place, this desert, his desert, how it stirs his insides. The grandness of everything and of every living thing mixing seductively with the fragrance of the brandy he sips. A bat shoots by, then another one, and their soaring night search for insects to gobble up no longer gives him the slightest start. He listens to the murmurs, the rustles, the peeps, the faint calls that could mean love or despair out there, the scrabbling of creatures seeking whatever it is they need. The moon is cut in half tonight, the stars preserved rather than gleaming. He remembers when his children were young, pointing out specific stars whose names he didn't know, had never known, saying to each of them, that star right there belongs to you, Phoebe, and that one to you, Camille, and that one to you, Simon. And they believed him. For years they believed those stars were theirs, their names attached to them in some astral registry. He stares up and thinks he ought to be done for the night. It's late, but not too late, and anyway the brandy is finished, and he wants to be fresh for tomorrow. It is pitch black in the bedroom and silent once he cuts the fan spinning entirely. And then Roma sighs her heartbroken sigh when she's dreaming about her grandmother and mother. He waits until his strong and happy wife's nocturnal sadness fades away, then carefully climbs into bed, fluffs his pillows, and closes his eyes. Soon there is an internal rush of lapping oceanic waves, pulling him under, into the ruffled layers of sleep, where he will travel to places he does not know, see people he never knew, and others he once loved. Traveling, he thinks, on his own, believing, as he always has, that he alone inhabits his head. Mistaken in his assumption that the past no longer exists. Mistaken, too, in his certainty that the world can be understood, that he understands the world, or at least that he understands his own. As his breath grows even and deep, a sensed rather than articulated sentiment washes over him. I've been a very lucky man. And that is true, absolutely true, but luck is a rescindable gift. That's the second theme that bubbled up in the writing of the Family Tabor, the impact of the past on the present. Many of us have no clue that who and how we are and how we respond to things might actually be traced to a distant past about which we have no idea. Roma is unique in this way. For her, the past is always present. For the children, they've never doubted that their past and their present are unified until they're forced to do so. And for Harry, the past never affects the present until he's forced to learn how wrong he's been. And when the past comes roaring into the Tabor's present, it will shock, shatter, and change the entire family. Over the course of this celebratory weekend, the Tabors will be assailed by all kinds of questions. How do the choices we make to embrace or abandon a love, a marriage, a dream, a faith, a bad act, a lost memory, the secrets and failures of others and ourselves shape us? What is the nature of repentance, of atonement? Can harm caused to a specific person be absolved by doing good for many others? Can the doing of good whitewash the bad that preceded it? And again, you'll have to read the novel to find out how all those questions are answered and how they affect the family. A writer's mind works, or at least mine does, by plumbing the unconscious, by making connections not at all clear at the outset. And with each of my novels, I've been surprised by a highly personal connection. When The Resurrection of Joan Ashby was published, and I was preparing for book events and interviews, I was astonished by something that I should have been aware of but wasn't, and I missed it entirely during all the writing of that novel. I'd created Joan Ashby. I gave her clarity of sense and purpose, the understanding of who and what she is, imbuing her with exceptional literary talent, and a single-minded focus on her future. And yet that same clarity of self and purpose that I gave to Joan, I kept circling around those truths for myself. And I realized that both Joan and I had lived unintended lives that required correction. And it happened again with the Family Tabor. When the Family family first came into my mind, they were from the beginning the Tabors. It was a name they came burdened with at the start. When I told my parents the name, they said, "Oh, that's wonderful," but it did not spark any connection to their own past of which I was not aware. When I was a little girl who loved reading and writing, on the day I dropped all my library books and swore and made my mother laugh and made my father throw his hands over his eyes, that day when I understood my first love was books and the power of their words, the heft and ability to change everything. That day when I think I already knew I wanted to be a writer and was indeed already a writer, I was 4 years old and living on a street named Tabor. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, yes.
We read
Joan Ashby.
in our book club. And of course, when we got to the point of betrayal by the older son, we were thrown off guard. Did not expect that at all. It's a wonderful surprise. We discussed it a lot in the book. And I just wondered, does that go back to your killing friends? That experience that you had where you felt betrayed? Or did you just,
It wasn't connected. Killing close friends, I wasn't betrayed by this person who I did not know at all. We just knew each other tangentially. It was just the idea of somebody I knew was publishing this first story collection that gave rise to this Killing Close Friends, which was not a commentary on this woman that I barely knew. I always knew at some point, one of the things that always intrigues me is that when I was growing up, there was this, when my parents were coming of age and growing up, there was this idea that every succeeding generation could outdo their parents, and that was the goal. And what happens when what you want to outdo a parent in is creative and not financial? And with the betrayal, it just seemed that it had to happen. So much of the book is about, a lot of the book is about, one of the themes, what are the rights, obligations, and responsibilities of creative genius? Are you able to put it in a box and does it remain yours? Should it be something that somebody else could access? And so all of that just came out and up.
and the fact that she couldn't forgive?
Well, I think not to spoil anything, she writes, I think that she will, I don't know, I think she's giving him the opportunity to be forgiven, but I think she requires him to take action, as opposed to sometimes saying I'm sorry is simply not enough, and you have to do something that is patent. Yeah, but I have hope for all of them. Anyone else? Yes.
I'm just curious. I loved your book,
thank you.
Resurrection of Joan Ashby, and I was one of, we also read it in our different book group, and I was one of the only people who loved all of the characters.
Thank you.
There were a lot of people in the group who disliked all of the characters.
Oh, that's interesting.
For one reason or another, and it was really interesting discussion because of that, and I'm wondering how you felt. Do you love all your characters when you're writing them, or did you write them specifically? Because I could see the reasons why people didn't like Joan, and didn't like her sons, and didn't like her husband.
It's interesting. I feel, it's become this concept, right? Likable characters versus unlikable characters. If you're likable, you're relatable. If you're unlikable, you're not relatable. And the truth is, we could look at people in our own lives and we love them and hate them for varying reasons and don't think about things like likability. I love and honor and respect all my characters. I understand them. They are who they are. What I've also found is that who likes which characters, or if there are people who don't like characters, I have found it's really a wonderful psychological tool for me to understand who they are. Liking characters, like liking somebody, and it tells me a lot more about the reader than I think that they're aware. And yes, it is, Joan, one of the themes I didn't discuss today, but one of the themes with Joan is this concept that motherhood should be something that every woman absolutely adores, you never question, you step into it, you should be willing to give yourself up, put your own hopes and desires on the table. And I think still, despite the fact that it's 2019 and we have made a lot of strides, there is still a natural inhibition, even mostly among women, to be willing to be free to express that view. And certainly among women who are mothers, if you get them alone, they all say the same thing. I wasn't sure, I feel like everything's changed, I don't get to do what I want to do. But they have a harder time expressing that in a group. So I love them all, and I think you got insight into some of your book group friends. Anyone else? Yes?
On that topic of motherhood, are you a mother yourself?
I should, how to answer that question. I'm a bonus mother,
Okay.
which is a term I much prefer to anything else. But like anything else, like I don't think and I'm not being defensive, it shouldn't matter, right? As a writer, I should be able to understand or at least find out, experience through perception and research and knowledge and reading what anyone is like. And you know that you're in all these last 2+ years touring for Joan Ashby, you are maybe only the second person who's ever asked me. Yeah, most people don't.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes?
What is the word? I didn't understand. You said you had a prefix to the word mothers.
Oh, a bonus. A bonus mother.
Bonus deal.
As opposed to step, which makes me sound like a witch instantly, or anyone who is one is a witch. And I have an apple and a gun or maybe an arrow. So I chose bonus up front, so I have bonus children, and I am their bonus mom. Which makes me sound like a lovely, delightful thing, right? Thank you. As opposed to someone who's going to kill them in their sleep. Anyone else? Any other questions? Oh, yes.
I think I read somewhere that Joan Ashby has been optioned for TV or film.
The Family Tabor has.
Oh, it's not Joan Ashby.
Joan Ashby, there have been many huge producers circling around her. It's not an easy book to translate. You know, there are short story excerpts that you really couldn't lose, I don't believe, if you're going to. No, I would love Joan Ashby. There's some talk about, I don't know if anyone's seen this show called The Place to Call Home. It's an Australian series. Right, everyone loved it. So Marta Dusseldorp, which is not a great name, but she apparently is very much in love with Joan Ashby, but she would want it set in Australia. I said, I don't care, move it anywhere.
In your background, would you require that you are involved in making?
No, absolutely. You know, it's funny. Everyone assumes that I want to be, but as I was talking, in all of my years in the film world, I never wrote scripts. I only wrote stories. It's such a different medium. It's a blueprint, and the beauty of writing prose or fiction the way I do is that I get to create everything, and I'm in charge of everything. And I think you need experts for film and television. And I've written the book, I've written her and the family exactly as I want them. And somebody else's, I think to give it life, to give it life in a new medium, you need another voice and another mindset. I mean, every book that I have read that I loved, that then turned into a film or a television show, if the writer, and this is a terrible thing to say, but if the writer insisted on complete involvement, that other medium piece was just lifeless for me. Let somebody else, and I'll write a new novel. Yes. Any last questions? Well, thank you so much for coming. Oh, somebody had a question.
I just wondered
Yes.
what you're working on now.
I am working on something that actually originated out of Joan Ashby. It has to do with one of her excerpted stories. So Yes, working on that as a novel. Yes.
Have you given up on the law?
You know, as an everyday practicing thing, yes, I have. But I still always read the Supreme Court cases and just decisions that come down. And I still love reading about it. But I don't miss it. Well, thank you everyone so much for coming.